Recorded from the nether regions of the Bible Belt, this is your Freethought TV.
Hey guys, welcome to the show. This is Freethought Northwest Arkansas. I'm your host, Donald Morton. Today's show is going to be on evolution, specifically human evolution, and I think it's going to be a great show. We have a lot of cool stuff that we've gotten for you. My guests that I brought with me, starting on the right, are Dr. Mike Plavkin. He is a professor of paleoanthropology at the University of Arkansas. How's it going? Did I say that right? You have many credentials, so I don't want to make sure I get them all. Also, we've got Doug Kruger. He is International Man of Mystery and also a professor at NWAC teaching philosophy and world history, world religions.
Yes.
And I'm Donald Morton. Also, we've got Alan Ashley on the left.
Hey guys.
He is he's a great guy.
Oh, thanks.
I don't know if you have... Anyway. So, on to announcements. We have, Doug is actually from the Fayetteville Freethinkers, and they meet every Saturday at the Fayetteville Library and give lectures, and it's very interesting. If you guys should all go. Do you want to say anything about it?
Yes, I'd like to say everything about it. We meet, as you mentioned, usually every Saturday at 2 o'clock at the Fayetteville Public Library. A couple of times a year we have meetings on Sundays for those who have trouble attending on Saturday. And you can come to our website and find out about our meetings at fayfreethinkers.com.
Also, there's a Freethought group in Rogers that meets every Friday at the Iron Horse Coffee Company. It is not a presentation style, but more like a social gathering. You just want to hang out and talk to freethinkers without the pressure of religious indoctrination, then come check us out and hang out with us. Also, if you want to email the show and tell us that we're wrong or that we're stupid, you can email us at theshow@freethoughtnwa.com. Or if you don't know how to use a computer, you can call us at 479-430-2112, and we have a voicemail. But be aware that if you leave a voicemail in there, we may play it on the show. That reminds me, we actually did get a voicemail, but I forgot to load it on the server, so I guess we can't play it. We'll put that on next time. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was the Casey Luskin lecture. This is a guy from the Discovery Institute that was involved in the creation, evolution, trying to get creationism taught in the schools. When was it, in 2004?
The decision was in 2005.
Yeah, and so Casey Luskin is kind of their PR guy, and he went down to the university a couple weeks ago and actually gave a lecture. First, they played the movie with Ben Stein, Expelled, and then after that, he went on to talk about it. I didn't go, but I know that you went, Doug, and did you go, Mike?
Yes, I did.
What did you guys think of it?
I have read quite a bit about the movie Expelled. It's actually the first time I had seen it all the way through.
Yeah, I haven't
managed to see the entire thing in clips, bits and pieces, and I do know quite a bit about some of the cases that were involved in it. And the movie has been widely viewed as not a very good piece of scholarship. We'll put it that way. Casey Luskin's lecture was very much in line with what I would expect from an advocate for intelligent design. I would pretty much disagree with virtually everything that he said.
I assume that he went over irreducible complexity
Yes.
and bacterial flagellum, which is their favorite example of...
Yes, all of which has been pretty thoroughly refuted and rebutted. And he claimed that that intelligent design is kept out of universities as a political campaign and a conspiracy amongst evolutionary biologists to keep the idea of an intelligent designer out of biology. He made the claim directly and indirectly that people who study intelligent design are persecuted and thrown out of universities, that they're not allowed to make their cases. And he also made the claim that intelligent design is not considered in universities, and that we don't study it and we don't actually allow it to be considered. And I think the general reply by scientists is that for the people who actually study these systems and know about what they're talking about and what they're saying, scientists appear to dismiss this stuff because it's approximately equivalent to somebody coming up and saying that 2 + 2 is 5. Your reaction is going to be, well, that's not true, and simply ignore it and move on. And they keep pushing and pushing and pushing and saying, well, it is true, well, it is true, well, it is true. And the reality is that factually there is virtually nothing that they say.
I think you're just not listening.
They claim that we're not listening, but the reality is that they're running a propaganda campaign that is not targeted at the scientific community, but rather at the public. And I think that that's shown by the fact that he did not give a talk in the biology department or the anthropology department. Nobody in the community of scientists there. And I contacted virtually everybody on the campus that I knew was associated with this stuff. Nobody had been contacted. Nobody knew about this stuff happening.
There was an article about the beliefs of how many people in Texas believe evolution versus creationism, and it was huge numbers, like 40% believe that dinosaurs and humans lived at the same time, or so. I have to pull the paper up to get these statistics, but
poll after poll. Generally speaking, people, if you poll the United States, about 12 to 15% of the population accepts evolution as is known in science, and the rest of the population vacillates between some form of theistic evolution to outright creationism, and with about, well, I can't say the number actually, but with a large percentage.
Well, the numbers are changing actually a lot faster than I would have thought. Just a few years ago, I think about 2004, that was the first time I had seen a poll where the number of people that believed in evolution outnumbered those that were creationists. It was 48% to 46% approximately. And now it's pretty clearly now on the side of evolution. A poll just last year, a Pew Research poll showed 48% once again for evolution, 46% for creation. And what they ask specifically is, do you believe that human beings evolved to their present form, as opposed to do you believe that human beings have always existed in their present form? And the evolution side seems to be ahead. However, one of the very positive signs that I've seen recently is, while those polls are about the public at large, the polls with regard to those between the ages of 18 and 26, I think it is, about 58% believe in evolution. So within a generation, things are going to change dramatically for the better.
A large number of those will be classified, though, as theistic.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. You made the distinction between evolution and theistic evolution, which isn't really evolution at all. I mean, they don't apply that.
Here's the statistics. This is from Texas. So this is only people in Texas. Nearly a third of Texans believe humans and dinosaurs roamed the earth at the same time. So almost 33%. And there's actually supposed to be fossils of human footprints and dinosaur footprints at the same time. So
yeah, those are the Glen Rose, Texas tracks, sometimes called the Paluxy man tracks. Those have been so thoroughly debunked by not just scientists but also creationists that you can go to the websites of the Institute for Creation Research and also Ken Ham's Answers in Genesis, two decidedly pro-creationist websites, and they will tell you specifically, do not use those as evidence for creation.
Right. If you go to answersingenesis.org is the creationist amalgamation of all of their arguments, and it is pretty entertaining. They've got, like you said, a list on there of all the things you shouldn't say, and it's all the stuff I hear all the time.
Right.
Even the theory versus fact, which we should probably get into, theory versus hypothesis.
Well, just on that line, you'll also notice that there's a division between the intelligent design community, which is represented by Casey Luskin, who was here talking, versus the Young Earth Creationists, who is Ken Ham's group. And if you look on Ken Ham's website, you'll see that a considerable amount of vitriol is directed towards the intelligent design community because they feel that they admit people who believe in an old age Earth. So there's controversy within their own community. The intelligent design community largely is designed to get around legal aspects of trying to teach creationism in schools. And it's accepted by a lot of people as a tool for that, but there's controversy within their own ranks as to whether you should actually accept that truly as truth or not. So,
Right. By the way, about Luskin's lecture recently, as dishonest as the Expelled movie was, the PowerPoint presentation that Luskin did right afterwards, which was about 90 minutes in length. So people had to sit through, a 2-hour movie plus another 90 minutes of PowerPoint presentation. Luskin's PowerPoints were also misrepresenting both the facts about evolution and the evidence and so forth, but also he said at one point to the audience, I don't want to dwell on the Dover decision, in which the intelligent design folks got trounced by the people against it.
Why would you want to dwell on a defeat?
Yeah, but then after having said that, he spent about, at least it seemed like 40 minutes talking about it and saying why the judge was wrong, and then misrepresenting what the judge had said and misrepresenting the judge's reasons for this, for his decision. So,
well, if he's truly wrong, then you can tell him he's wrong and he'll listen then, right? What did he say when you ask him?
Well, that was one of the least interesting parts of his talk, was that when the question and answer period finally came around, he had spent so much time putting everyone to sleep with these other things he had done. There were only a few people left by the time it was question and answer period, and you could ask him one simple question, and he would go on with a 15-minute answer. Which is his strategy to try to get fewer questions. So people weren't really able to ask him about the vast majority of things that he had said or that had appeared in the movie. So it was very frustrating for those of us who were aware of the misrepresentations in the Expelled movie and those in his PowerPoint presentation. You didn't have much of a chance to cross-examine him about some of those things.
That tactic of information overload, give you so much information you can't possibly, respond to all of it in a question. I mean, he's basically over-talking everyone who asks a question.
And that's a common strategy for creationists. I got into that when I started looking into radiometric dating, because I know when we start talking about the fossils later, that one of the first questions people are going to have is, well, how do you know how old it is? So they're going to question radiometric dating. So I went in to the creationist sites and started researching their arguments against it, and it just, it made my head spin with all the different... I'm not a geologist, so I don't understand all that stuff. But they did pages and pages and pages of stuff and that's what they always do. And they don't even wait for you to respond, even if it's just over the argument for the existence of God. They'll just plop down as many arguments as they can, and refute all this.
Well, of course, one of the things that one can ask about that strategy is if you really have really good evidence against this kind of radiometric dating or against evolution in general or whatever it is that they're claiming they can refute, why don't we see this in the scientific journals? Why don't they get this material published? And that's one of the difficulties of their position, is that they claim on the one hand that it's scientific, but you don't see it in science journals. And of course, science, if there's one thing that people can know about science if they ever get into the field, is that it's a very cutthroat kind of a business. You can make yourself famous by showing that some long-held theory is mistaken.
Absolutely.
Okay. I mean, in fact, you can win a Nobel Prize by doing that sort of thing. And so if anybody could actually do what these creationists claim they can do, refute evolution, they can, there would be legitimate scientists clamoring to try to be the first one to show that it's wrong. But we don't see that because they can't do it.
Well, I thought it was a conspiracy that they just keep creationists out of the journals just because.
Yeah, I do hear that argument, that the other scientists don't properly review their other scientists' work because they don't want to come down on their fellow.
And they're actually trying to create their own journals.
The way that most people do not understand the way the peer review system actually works, and I've worked as an editor and associate editor for scientific journals, and most papers are sent out to individuals who have qualifications to review it, and then they anonymously review the paper. And so the largest I ever sent out was on a paper that we sent back 35 single-spaced pages of review on this paper, and it was absolutely savage. It was so savage that you would just absolutely be stunned by what people said about this. Now, part of that paper ended up getting published, and part of it ended up getting rejected. It is not a nice process. Scientists do not work together on these things. The scientific process is, I try to tell students, largely a destructive process. When somebody makes a proposition, people try to test it and try to tear it down. All scientific propositions are like that. And if they survive the criticism, then they gradually will build up acceptance and be accepted in the community as a well-substantiated or even a thinly substantiated, depending on the nature of the evidence. People are very honest about this stuff, but having a conspiracy in science is virtually impossible to do.
It's interesting you say that, though, because I work as a programmer, and Alan does as well. And in code reviews, when we spend months writing a program, we go into code review with other programmers, and they will rip it apart.
They will shred you. Yeah, that's absolutely right. And you have to, and in the process, you have to defend yourself. So typically, when a paper goes out, and I've had papers of my own that go out for this, you'll get the reviews back, and most of us just hate it, because it can be humiliating to find out the things that you've done, and then you correct the paper, and you either defend what you did or you change what you did. And this can go on for several times. The normal round will be 3 reviews for most journals. And then if you get rejected from a journal, a lot of people will then go down a list of journals. And in my own discipline, there are 4, 5, 6 journals until you get down to a list of journals, which we won't name, but we kind of laugh at them and go, well, that's the journal which obviously you got rejected from someplace else. And there are papers out there which are just appallingly bad, but still can get published. Now, if these creationists are claiming they can't get published, it's because they're not trying, or their stuff is simply so god-awful bad that nobody will publish this stuff.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting, it's almost like if you really want to get to the truth and you want to believe true things, you have to be able to set your ego aside and let your beliefs be questioned and not get your hurt feelings about it. And that's largely what I see the problem is with a lot of theists, is that they will present their argument, and if you present evidence against it, you hurt my feelings. Yeah. And why are you saying that? It's offensive.
Most of us in the business, you have to, at some point, we'll have to admit you were wrong. I have had to admit in press that I have been wrong about things in the past, and you have to swallow your pride and actually put in press that, I'm preferably what you like to do is test your own hypothesis so that you prove yourself wrong, which is always easier to do than when somebody else does it. but no, this is part of the scientific process. Scientists will admit that they are wrong. There are a few people who get very adherent to a particular idea, and they will carry it to the grave. But the general rule of thumb is that, especially with new generations constantly coming up, that people will either have to change or be pushed aside if they are wrong about something. So to say that we're in a conspiracy about stuff, it's just not the scientific process, and it's open. Anybody can open up any journal and look at these things and see how it works.
In the case, I think this happened to some extent in the Dover case in 2005, but back in the early 80s, there was a case also here in the state of Arkansas about teaching evolution in the public schools. And one of the claims that the creationists made at that time was that they would submit articles to reputable scientific journals, but that they were being rejected because of ideological differences and not because of the science involved. So the judge asked them to substantiate that and say, show me examples of these journal articles that you sent that were rejected. Well, it turns out they could not produce a single one. It was all a big lie.
It's interesting that the judges are big on evidence and reason, and lawyers are too, so it seems like it's worked to our advantage, that although lawyers don't necessarily understand science, they do understand logic and evidence.
Well, in the Dover trial, you saw that the Discovery Institute, Luskin said that they thought that the case was terrible and they didn't support it, but in reality, the Discovery Institute had a number of people that were to testify at the Dover trial, and they pulled out. And they pulled out as fast as they possibly could.
They could see they weren't going to win.
They saw the writing on the wall, and they retreated. And they retreated as fast as they could. And the only one to get on the stand really was Behe, and he was just absolutely flayed alive in front of people.
Let's move on to the Jack Chick tracks. If I could get someone in the control room, scroll through the slides that I have and pick out the yellow picture. Yeah, that one. This is from some tracks by a theist named Jack Chick, and if you go to chick.com, you can look at all of his comic books, and they are very entertaining, but also very devoid of fact. So this is Jack's refutation of why the human evolution data is bad. And the first, can you put it back up? Okay, the first thing I want to point out is you've got it's funny you can't see us behind it. That's why they took it down. The transition from, it's in a straight line. Okay, take it back down. I'm really confusing him. Anyway, that's not, I've heard people say that it's confusing to people because it makes them think that it goes from one to another, when in reality, it's just a nice tree. So it makes it seem like we came from monkeys, but in fact, there is a common ancestor. So that traditional, like, line by line degradation.
It's not an evolution ladder.
Yeah,
It's a
bush
tree or a tree.
Well, they have Lucy portrayed as a chimp, actually,
Yeah.
it looks like.
Yeah, the first one says Lucy, which is Australopithecus anamensis or afarensis?
Afarensis.
Afarensis. His quote on it is, "Nearly all experts agree that Lucy was just a 3-foot-tall chimpanzee."
I know of nobody who.
It says
Absolutely
here,
no
all
one.
experts agree.
Absolutely nobody says that Lucy is a 3-foot-tall
How can he say
chimpanzee.
that?
He's lying.
Okay.
Well, how can you say? It's not illegal to publish false information as long as it's not about a specific person.
Yeah.
So why is it not a chimpanzee?
Well, Australopithecus afarensis is represented by more than Lucy. Don Johansson, in fact, has a picture that he put up of all the jaws of this thing, and it's just the picture we like to joke amongst ourselves was made by Don just to make us all jealous at how much material they actually found this thing. Afarensis is now very well known, very well represented. We have the sample sizes for most of the anatomy of Afarensis is good enough that we can do statistics on it. We know about the variation. There are parts of the animal that we don't know very much about. The anatomy of the rib cage, for example, ribs are not well preserved usually, and so there's very little that's known about that. But for example, the hip and the leg, the lower back, the head and the jaws, the teeth, the limb bones, these are all well represented and we know quite a bit about it. In terms of the skull, the teeth look very much like human teeth. There are some very minor differences, but you would have to be an expert to be able to tell. There are still some what we call primitive retentions. For example, the canine teeth, the teeth up in the front of the jaw, are larger than a modern human's, noticeably visually larger than a modern human's. They're much smaller than living apes, and they are intermediate in form. They are measurably intermediate. When you graph them out, you can talk about no transitional fossils, but it's, if you have a big one and a small one, these things are right in the middle. It is transitional in form.
I thought that they said that there were no transitional
They're
fossils.
absolutely wrong. They are absolutely wrong. That's just so not true that it is a stunning statement. Nevertheless, we have the pelvis of this thing, which shows that it walked on 2 legs. So there have been debates about...
Now, how do you know from the pelvis that it walked on 2 legs?
Well, there's a couple of features that we have from the ankle, from the knee, from the hip.
I understand that
pelvis.
the knee points inwards, and
That's right. It's what we call a valgus knee. If you look at a chimpanzee, the legs, when it walks on 2 legs, and chimpanzees and bonobos, close relatives of chimpanzees, will walk on 2 legs about 15% of the time in the case of bonobos. Their legs, when they stand up, are straight up and down to their knees.
And it's harder for them, right?
Yes, it is. It's harder for them to do that. And in humans, the knees come together, and it's called a valgus knee. It's about an 11-degree angle or so, where the femur comes in, and it gets down to the knee, and then the tibia goes straight down. Now the foot is straight down on the ground too, so the tibia comes straight down onto the foot. Unlike in a chimpanzee, if you have the joint at the end of the tibia where it intersects the foot, for an animal that walks on 2 legs, it's going to have a flat surface, parallel to the ground. A chimpanzee has an angled surface where it inverts the foot. This thing has a flat thing, just like a human. If you look at the knee, it not only does it have the valgus knee, but if you take the fossils, and I've handled the originals myself, and if you take those knees and you put the femur against the tibia, not only does it have the valgus feature, you can just put the knee together and see that it angles off, but it also locks. The knee of a chimpanzee is rounded at the end of the femur, and in a human it has a flat surface, as you would expect from something that habitually stands and puts the pressure down on it. In these things, you can feel it lock, as if it was standing on 2 legs. If you look at the hip, you'll see that the hip also, which is different from modern humans, I can very easily recognize an Australopithecus hip just by glancing at it, by the shape of the end that fits up in the pelvis. But at the same time, it's also characteristically set up so that it would be walking on 2 legs.
Now, before you go on, how old is this fossil?
They're about 3 million years old.
So 3 million years ago, we know that
absolutely.
our ancestors walked up.
That's right. And in the hip itself, the hip is different in that the blades of the pelvis have been angled around so that your gluteal muscles, right, you have actually 3 of these, not just one.
That's what we're sitting on, right?
Actually, you're not. They're pulled over to the side. If you were sitting on them, you would be in agony. You're actually sitting on a bone. But the gluteal muscles are angled over to the side so that when you walk on 2 legs, your pelvis doesn't collapse because you're going to be standing on one leg, the weight of the pelvis. If you can imagine, let's just take a pen here and you just put it on one stilt and it's angled and the center of gravity is over to one side, the pen falls. Right? So you have to have a muscle over to one side to pull that pen up when you take the weight off of it. And those are the gluteal muscles. And in humans, or bipedal animals, what you have to do is take the pelvis from the chimp condition, which is about like this, to the human condition so that you swing these muscles around to the side. Lucy has those muscles. There is no question about it, and there is nobody who does biomechanics and understands anything about the limbs of these animals that claims that they are anything but bipedal. They are habitually bipedal.
I was going to say, isn't there something else about where the skull connects to the neck as well?
That's right. The foramen magnum, which is where the vertebral column attaches at the base of the skull, tends to be located underneath of the skull instead of at the back of the skull. Mm-hmm. It's presumably because you're balancing the head on top of the vertebral column, and these things have the skull balanced on top, so it's clearly a bipedal character.
But it's not. You couldn't say that it was a human either, right?
No, it's not a human. No, if you put that thing, sometimes you'll hear creationists say, well, if you dress them up in a coat and tie and put them on a hat on a New York subway, then nobody would notice. And I've ridden the New York subway an awful lot, and if you put that thing in a coat and tie and a hat and put it on there would be screaming and running for the doors. And it's just, a lot of people would be looking really nervous around it.
You mean if it was the full creature, not just the skeleton?
It's exactly. The impression you would get of it if it was walking around is that it would look like a very, very weird ape, chimpanzee with a kind of a short face. The brain is about just barely bigger than that of a chimpanzee, but it's walking on 2 legs like you and me. It would be a very unusual animal to look at. As to whether it's human or not, that's something that's open to debate. At some point, there's a transition there, but these animals are very much intermediate. They're walking on 2 legs like humans. They have a human-like body. But at the same time, their head is much more ape-like. The skull does have features that are distinctly human on it, and intermediate features too. But
well, one of the things that provides no end of amusement for many of us skeptics about creationism is that a lot of times what the creationists do is show in pictorial form, or sometimes in their books they'll have a picture of Lucy and so on, just show the bones and then just ask the reader to evaluate them and say, does this look like a human answer? Doesn't this look like a chimp or whatever? Well, most of the readers are not experienced in evaluating whether something is or isn't a chimp. So they're not really in a position to do that. But I've had people show me pictures of Lucy and say, doesn't that just look like a chimp? Or show me, some other fossil. Doesn't that just look like a bird or whatever, Archaeopteryx and so on. Well, the vast majority, especially of their constituency, don't have expertise there.
Yeah.
So that's not really a fair question. And if someone were to sit down with a biologist and talk about the differences, maybe they could begin to understand. But the notion that some non-expert could just pick up a picture, not even examine the bones, and make a determination that all of the world's best biologists are wrong,
it's really
and I'm right,
amazing how much
is
you can
absurd.
tell just from the bones. And I think most people don't realize when you look at, say, a tibia or a femur, you can tell a lot about the animal just based on knowledge of human anatomy, but most people don't have that, so they have no idea.
well, all of these ideas too are subject to testing, in that a lot of our business actually is not just people staring at bones, but if you come up with a hypothesis that, for example, the tibial, the ankle joint is oriented in a particular way in association with bipedalism, you will end up with dissertations and studies and analyses, biomechanical analyses done in labs with living animals and with models. And people will test these ideas and ask the question, is this truly a feature that's associated with this function? Is the function necessary? Is the feature uniquely associated with it? Do you see it in other animals? Why would that feature occur in this way? And this happens throughout the body. I have a specialty of my own where we test ideas about this stuff intensely. And where it's quick to point out that you cannot say certain things about the animals, as we are happy to say things about them. And we're much happier when we can say something about the animals than not. But
And you're going to make sure that when you go out and you say something, that you're not going to have to go back, or you try not to have to go back and
it's
correct
very
yourself.
embarrassing. That's right.
You want to get it right the first time.
It's
I
yeah,
was having
exactly.
forget that we were supposed to go into the chick track.
Oh.
Let's get to the
Yeah, exactly.
Well, by the way, I do have a comment
So-
about the chick tract too in relation to what you just said, is that part of the strategy here in this little tract is to try to portray the process or the conclusions
Yes.
of the scientists as pretty much a matter of bias and ideology, rather than, notice there's nothing here about any kind of a process of testing, of peer review, or anything like that. They make it sound like there is a group of people that have decided to say that these are human ancestor bones and so forth, and they've decided to say that because they want to say it, not because there's any kind of a
Right.
process of research or in testing or anything of that sort. And so this entire discussion that's portrayed in this chick tract between the professor and the student is simply a matter of ideology, and it's entirely verbal, little or no reference to any kind of evidence. And so the student can, according to this chick tract, just totally refute the professor just by saying things and not making reference to any kind of research at all. In fact, he just refers a couple of times to the Bible, and the professor ends up, admitting that evolution is wrong and quitting his job.
Yeah,
et
in the
cetera.
story they have, the professor is up there lecturing, and the student stands up and tells him he's wrong, and they argue back and forth, and of course the creationist wins, and the professor starts crying and runs out, and you can see him with the suitcase going back like, I'm going to quit my job, and they'll understand. Like,
Right,
it's so
yeah.
funny, a professor would really quit just because someone proved him wrong. Like, anyway, okay, so.
Or that a student with no evidence could just prove him wrong.
Yeah. So I want to go through the rest of these real quick, and of course what they've done is they've picked really bad examples. They picked the poorest evidence that they could find and said, here's the evidence that they say for human evolution, and obviously it's ridiculous. Well, much of this is, some of these are not good evidence, but there's good evidence that we have for other stuff, so we'll cover their stuff first and then get on to the good stuff.
Well, as a block here, what you find is that there's two components. The first is they've taken a number of examples of what we call extant Homo or Homo sapiens. For example, New Guinea man, Cro-Magnon man.
Right, and they try to
these
say
are-
that those are separate species.
These separate
but they're not.
species, these are modern humans, and they've always been recognized as modern humans. And so you can just toss those off and say that, well, there's no controversy about that at all. Those are a modern human. The Heidelberg man, Nebraska man, Piltdown man, these were, in the case of Piltdown, it was a fraud. In the case of Nebraska man, it was an extraordinarily embarrassing misidentification by an otherwise expert paleontologist who didn't know very much about humans, and it was pointed out very quickly. The thing about these frauds, especially the Piltdown, is that it was not the creationists who found out the fraud, it was the scientists. Piltdown man, I have seen people claim that we assiduously avoid talking about Piltdown and the frauds, and we try to cover these things up. And in point of fact, I have an entire lecture devoted to it. We think it's great because it serves as a teaching tool, because Piltdown occurred before there was a fossil record for humans. And the fraud was successful at the time because it played into the expectations that some scientists had about how human evolution should have proceeded. And the guy pulled a fast one on them, and they suckered for it, and it was extremely embarrassing for the British. But it was shown by scientists, not by creationists, to be a fraud. It was over a period of time. People were skeptical about it when it first came out, in fact.
Showing how science actually works.
And science actually did work.
that it's a
Nebraska man,
self-correcting process.
Nebraska man, the guy who identified it, admitted that he made a mistake. It was quickly pointed out to him, and it was quickly reversed. Heidelberg man, Homo heidelbergensis, is accepted as a taxon now, is applied by many people to what we used to call archaic Homo sapiens. It's very close to Homo, but there's an enormous gap there between those. Peking man, they say that the fossils are all missing. Or to quote him, he says, supposedly 500,000 years old, but all evidence has disappeared. Well, Peking man is classified as Homo erectus, and we have boatloads of evidence of Homo erectus. There's quite a bit of material of Homo erectus available, and it is true that fossils from Chakadian Cave were destroyed on the docks in Nanking when they were trying to get them away in World War II from the Japanese invasion. They got blown up. but they've recovered other fossils from the same cave site, and there are other fossils of the same taxon that are available from other areas. So it's extraordinarily misrepresentative to claim that these things have mysteriously disappeared and we're somehow in a conspiracy against these things. Well, it's just not true. And then finally, when you look at the gap here, between Lucy and Heidelbergensis, there's just an enormous temporal gap, time gap. They're leaving out a tremendous amount of evidence, just ignoring it.
Well, let's talk about
completely.
some of that other evidence. Some of the other species we have, Auroran tuganensis.
Auroran tuganensis, yes.
Now, how old is that?
Auroran is, there's
Okay, I
two
have it
species at the root there, Sahelanthropus and Auroran tuganensis. Auroran is from Kenya. It's about 6 million years old. Not a lot of evidence for that one. There are a few specimens, and people are returning there and actively looking for more evidence. It has affinities to hominids. It appears to be a hominid. There was recently a paper out that showed that, yes, indeed, it does seem to have hominid affinities.
Which bones do we have?
There is a fragment of a femur, which appears to be a hominid, and then there's some other remains, but very scattered.
And you know it was a hominid because of the way the femur is.
Basically, yeah, they're doing
connected.
some shape analyses on these things. And when we say that it has hominin affinities, we're very careful about that when they say it. Hominin affinity means that we really aren't really sure just what this thing is. The scientists are not proclaiming that this thing is the ancestral hominid. What they're saying is that this is a really interesting specimen, and it appears to have some characteristics
And it's
that are
interesting
hominid.
because it's hominid and it's really
Well,
old.
it's 6 million years old, and the molecular evidence says that the human-chimp split happened 6 to 7 million years ago. It looks primitive, but at the same time, the evidence seems to suggest that it might be a hominin, but we don't have a huge amount of data on it, so people are you'll notice in the phylogenies, that people do not attach this thing. They don't say it's ancestral to any particular thing. They just say it's probably a hominin.
Now you said it's what, 7 million years old?
Auroran is about 6 million.
And
yeah.
how do we know that it's 6 million years old given
That'll
the
be
creation is
radiometrically dated.
Radiometric date.
Yeah, from the rocks.
And we should probably go over, since I know a lot of viewers believe that the Earth is 6,000 years old, we should probably cover how radiometric dating works in a very broad sense. There's a lot of different kinds, and I know just from my lay reading that there are, basically they measure radioactive isotopes in the rocks. Mm-hmm. And there are certain radioactive isotopes that decay from one element into another at a known rate. And different elements decay at different rates. So some may have a half-life of like 3 milliseconds. Some have a half-life of like 48 million years. So depending on the element you pick, you can measure different time ranges. So what they do, for example, in potassium-argon dating, they will take a rock and they'll measure how much potassium is in there and how much argon is in there, and whatever the percentage is, potassium decays into argon at a known rate. So they know that if the rock started out with so much potassium, which they know because of the way that the rock hardens after it comes up from lava, they know it started out with potassium, and after a certain amount of time, you should know how much argon there is in it. So they just measure the amount, and that's how they figure out how old it is. Is that
Pretty close, yeah.
okay?
Pretty good.
Pretty good
Yeah,
for a program.
Yes, it's a very
And-
simple idea.
The
It's
internet
a-
is useful.
Yeah, and they're essentially the whole thing falls under radiometric dating, but there's a lot of different tools within that tool set that you can use depending on the age range you're looking at.
Well, and they don't use it by itself. I mean, they can test it versus other ways of dating things to see how accurate it is, right?
That's right, and people are dating methods are very intensely scrutinized. One of the things about creationists that they will do is say that the dating methods are wrong because they rely on assumptions, to which you reply, well, which assumptions are you talking about? The presupposition there is that that either the geologists who are doing the dating are so deluded that they only select the dates that they want, which is what they claim actually, very explicitly. Another assumption is that the geologists are just too stupid to realize these things, and therefore they haven't studied them, when in fact they have studied them very intensely. And there are multiple methods for dating that have been proposed, and they get tossed out because they're demonstrated that they don't work. And the dating methods are constantly being refined and scrutinized, and people are looking for how the dating method could go wrong. What are all the sources of error that you could get in the dating? Typically with a fossil locality, you have to emphasize that when you get a fossil locality, you will not do this yourself, but you'll get geologists to come in, professionals to come in and work on these localities. And those professionals are trained in how to take samples so that they're not contaminated. Usually what you'll do is send the samples off to separate labs, and they will not be marked so that the lab does not know what date it is supposed to be, and you do it in separate labs so that each lab does not know what the results are going to be. And when the results come back, they usually all agree. And so if you have 3 different labs taking 3 samples from a place they don't know, it's just labeled 392A-70, and they come back and say it's 3.5 million years old plus or minus 0.19, then, and they all give you the same answer, then you can be fairly confident that analysis is giving you the same result.
One of the things that was mentioned in the Chick track is that they used potassium argon dating on the lava from the 1986 Mount St. Helens explosion.
Yes.
And it came back that it was like 2 million years or so old or something. And that supposedly disproves radiometric dating. But actually, I mean, there's a minimum range.
Yeah, that's right. Potassium argon cannot date things younger than about 500,000 to 600,000 years.
Because you have to have so much, it has to have decayed to amass enough argon to do the statistical
and
analysis.
it's the old maxim garbage in, garbage out. If you knowingly violate the assumptions of the analysis and do a junk analysis, well, you'll get junk out. The Mount St. Helens thing, if you showed it to geochemists, they sort of laugh and said, of course, this is what you're going to get. It's below the resolution of the dating method. They'll also criticize carbon-14, by the way. You'll see that very commonly. Carbon-14 is used in archaeology. It, under normal circumstances, can't date anything older than about 40 to 50,000 years. If things are just right, you might get 70,000 years to accuracy. And beyond that, it starts getting very, very dicey. So for paleontology and evolution, actually, carbon-14 is not used. It's used mostly for things like old biblical archaeology and local archaeology.
Like the Strat of Turin and things like that.
Yes, actually, yeah.
By the way, one of the positions now among the creationists to try to undermine radiometric dating is that they kind of recognize now that this is such a very carefully policed type of a field, that there's a lot of self-correction going on and so on, that now their sort of fallback position about all this kind of dating is that it rests on the assumption that there's a what would you say, not a gradual variation, that it's the same in the present that it was in the past.
This is one of my favorites.
And that we can't know that what it was in the past because we weren't there, hence, therefore, it's sort of a free-for-all.
This is one of my favorites because the rebuttal to this one is very, very simple. Radiometric decay happens for the same phenomena that gives us nuclear bombs and nuclear power plants. We know exactly how it works. It's basic physics, which is taught at any physics class, right? You cannot change these physical properties. This is basic physics, laws of the universe, right? Radioactive decay releases energy. We know how much radioactive isotope is out there, approximately, and you can just crank the numbers and ask the simple question: if the Earth is 6,000 years old, how much energy would have been released to generate this much radioactive daughter product, and where would the energy go? And the answer is, if the Earth was 6,000 years old, from what we know about geology now, we would be living on a molten ball of lava right now. It would have been so hot. Right? Those decay rates, if they changed, and they don't change, that's a physical principle. It's denying that airplanes fly and nuclear bombs don't blow up to say that they vary. But if they actually did vary the way that they did, then the Earth would be a molten blob of lava. It would simply be too hot, right? You can't, they're trying to have it both ways, and most people don't.
Well, the problem is people don't have the education
to
understand
most people
this
don't
stuff,
understand
but they don't know that they don't have the
That's
education.
right. So
to
when somebody
understand
comes in and says this, there's no rebuttal to it because they don't really, they don't have an easy answer for it.
Well, and by the way, you'll just be quoted right now as saying there's no rebuttal. But
that's called the quote mining, right? The out of context thing. Steve Gould used to just be driven nuts by it.
But one of the other rebuttals that one can do is that when they do come up with their young Earth, type of arguments, they assume a constant rate of decay or of moon dust or of sun recession or moon recession and so on. They have the same type of arguments that they've used for years that rely on cherry picking. The present is going to resemble the past type of an assumption. So they want to say that we can't have that type of an assumption, but they do it themselves.
Yes.
Is it Dawkins who compares the difference between the 6,000 years and the 14 million year time range of the Earth as being, if you were that far off, that'd be like thinking that New York City was 10 yards from San Francisco or something. I think that's the example he uses. That's the order of magnitude, how far off that.
Way off.
So there is something else I forgot to do. I forgot to set my clock, so I have no idea how much time has passed. If I could get the control room to, I don't know, look at the DVD player and see. Because I forgot. Anyway, 55, 10, 5. It's got 2 syllables and 1 word.
I would guess 15.
We have 15 minutes left.
Wow.
Oh no!
Time flies.
Wow,
Okay,
let's look at
about-
those hominid evolutions.
Let's keep going.
Yeah, I'm just sitting here learning. You guys
Well,
have
show
so
'em the
much
gap.
information. I can't.
The next hominid Jesus. The next hominid genus, and I don't have no idea how to say it. Sahelanthropus.
Sahelanthropus.
Okay. Now, how old is that?
It's approximately 7 million years, but the dating on that one is more uncertain, and people are quite open about it. We have to rely on the rocks that we have. The people who found it did the very best job that they can, and the best estimate is that it's approximately 7 million years old.
So
And,
how do we, on that one, how do we know that it couldn't be the same as Auroran?
Well, Tim White maintains that Auroran, Sahelanthropus, and Ardipithecus are all the same thing.
Okay.
Auroran or Sahelanthropus is, again, it's one of these things that there's very little, a skull, and it has hominin affinities. And that's about the best we can say until we get more material. There's a lot of stuff out there like that, where people get these things, and the scientific community does not hold them up and proclaim them to be the great things. Last year there was a thing called IDA that was released, for example. IDA was a circumanian adapoid primate, which makes no sense to most people. But it was held up as this great human ancestor.
News blows it way out of
I was in Kenya at the time, actually, and so we had heard news of this thing coming out, and we were like, oh my gosh, something new is coming out, something new is coming out. And then we finally, over the very slow email, got it, and within the first 3 lines, as soon as they said circumanian, I was like, oh no.
What is
Somebody's
the deal
running
with
a piece.
science reporting? Why can't they get
It was somebody running a PR campaign, and they were just using it to make a big
They had a
stir.
huge,
And it was just a messel primate. These things are well known. Chris Beard is a friend of mine. He says, I've got 14 of them in my basement.
Yeah, I think they had a huge show in
they're
New York about that.
Yeah, they
just a
did.
few
And the
months
mayor
ago.
came out.
Huge,
It was a hideous embarrassment. And I know some of the guys who were involved in that, and honestly, it was an embarrassment to those guys. They got totally snipped by the PR people. But the reality is for these things that, when you come up with something like that and it's wrong, the scientific community with IDA just absolutely raked those guys through the coal. They shot that thing right down. And in the scientific literature, it got absolutely nowhere.
And what species was that?
That was Darwinius, it was called.
Darwinius.
And it was it's what is called a circumanian adapoid. It's a well-known kind of Eocene primate. Now, Sahelanthropus is one of these things where people are very cautious with it. We are not quite sure what that thing is, but it appears to be a hominin, an early member of the human clade, as we call our group. But there's not a whole heck of a lot you can say about it yet. And so most people are evaluating, is it truly a hominin? We'll wait and see. And where does it fit in the hominin family tree? We're not quite sure because we don't have enough data. And most scientists, when you talk to them about it, they'll say pretty much the same thing. That's about where we stand with it.
Scientists are very
It's intriguing.
open about not knowing
It
something.
is very open about it.
Creationists latch on
It
to
is
that
a
going,
wonderful
So
thing.
you
though.
admit that you don't know
don't
Of course,
everything.
no, and that's. I have not actually seen the Sahelanthropus. I've seen almost everything else, but Sahelanthropus specimen I haven't seen. So I'm not going to go any further than what I know has been published
What
in
about
literature. in my friends.
Kenyanthropus?
Kenyanthropus platyops is currently being processed by Fred Spore's lab, and it's a wonderful specimen. It came in 3 pieces, and it's very busted up, and people, again, are not quite sure what that thing is. Some people are saying that it is a member of Homo. Some people are saying it's ancestral to Homo rudolfensis.
Do they know enough to know that it needs its own genus?
Maybe. There are some that are saying that it should not be in its own genus. Others say that it is. In fact, I know last year there was a big, quite public fight over it between 2 of the principals.
So these
in the
finds
public.
from like 6 million years old, 7 million years old, you only usually find a few bones, right? You don't ever find
It depends on if you're lucky. Ardipithecus ramidus is, they found a whole treasure trove of those things. They got at least 14 individuals of it. It's a huge deposit, but it's been very difficult to prepare. Now, Kenyanthropus is being prepared at this point, so we'll be interested to see what exactly it looks like. But it's a very difficult specimen because it's all crushed up, and so they're working on it in the labs, trying to get the thing fit back together to see exactly what it looked like. It appears to be have affinities with another taxon that we call Homo rudolfensis, a couple of other specimens. But at the moment,
isn't Homo rudolfensis closer in the timeline to
it comes later.
Sapiens?
Yeah, it comes later. So rudolfensis is there are two early Homo species, habilis and rudolfensis, and not even everybody accepts that they're two separate things. I think most people do now accept that they're separate taxa.
Can we
separate
get
species.
there's a
phylogeny
graph
map.
I want the control room to put up. It's the black chart with all the little bars on. Yeah, that.
Yeah, there you go.
So that is a phylogeny of all the ancestral human ancestors. And this is mostly what I wanted the audience to get a sense of, is how much data we know about the different species that came before humans. And some of these are the ones that we've been talking about. So is there anything you want to say about that before we take it
Well, if you
on?
look at it just as a quick overview, you'll see that just like I had mentioned before, in the to the left, in the pink and the orange, you've got a question mark beside that. Those are Auroran and Sahelanthropus. Then you've got Ardipithecus in there, which is represented by two different species, Ardipithecus cadava and Ardipithecus ramidus. Oh, there we go. So I can look at this myself.
Yeah, I printed it out too.
Thanks. And you've got Ardipithecus represented by two different species. Those were just, the skeleton was just published last year, and currently scientists are debating and studying these things. Australopithecus anamensis in the green, the first green to the left, is known by relatively few specimens, and I know a skeleton is going to be published on that. It has not been published yet, so we know more about it than what's represented here, but that will probably come out this year. Australopithecus afarensis, the large green bar intermediate, is known by abundant remains. Africanus, Australopithecus africanus, the next big green bar, is known by abundant remains from South Africa. In fact, in January, we were at a conference in South Africa where we had all of the postcranial specimens out, and it took 2 rooms to hold them all. So we had 20 people looking at these things, and to spread them out and let people look at them, it's not a piece of a specimen. It took 2 rooms, and that was just the ones in one place. Then we had to travel up to Pretoria to another place, in another conference room, to see other material, and that was just material from one site.
Wow.
So this is a well-known animal. Australopithecus garhi is known by a single specimen. Canianthropus platyops, the yellow thing there, is known by a single specimen. It's very intriguing. Homo rudolfensis is known by some scrappy remains, and habilis is known by some better material. We have a little bit better stuff. Homo ergaster and erectus, some people recognize them as separate, some people recognize them as a single thing, but together they're quite abundant remains of that. Paranthropus boisei, Ethiopicus, is represented by a single species. Robustus and boisei, those 2 pink bars down there, there's quite a bit of material on those. Lots of teeth and jaws. So it's lots of material.
The control room start going through the slides? We have some pictures of some of these fossil finds.
They're cool.
And could the control room say how much time we have left? Just start going through the slides, and we'll tell you next slide. Okay, so this is Australopithecus afarensis.
That's
which is
afarensis.
Lucy.
That's
this
the
is what
Lucy
they said
skeleton.
was a 3-foot-tall chimpanzee.
Yeah, and it isn't. And this is the most famous skeleton of this species that was found. And it's, you see it's got a tibia, femur, it's got a good chunk of the pelvis, the sacrum, a number of ribs, it's got pieces of both arms, clavicle, and bits and pieces of the face.
So you can see the legs tilting inward, which gives
That's right.
it balance.
Yeah, but you also have to remember that there's a lot other material from other individuals.
Right.
This is just famous because it's part of a single individual, and there's enough of it there to get a good idea about how big it is and what the body shape looked like. But of all the parts of that animal are known from quite a bit of material, including the skulls. There are several complete skulls of this taxon that are available. And we actually have enough material from Australopithecus afarensis that we can show it evolving over time. And that's important to underscore, that this taxon is not just one individual, but there is enough material that you can show transitions, gradual transitions through the species over time.
Right.
And it is changing as it evolves.
Can we go to the next?
Over time, so.
Pull up another slide.
That's the Taung child from South Africa. This was the first Australopithecus that was found. It's actually It's actually a kid. It was an eagle kill. We know that because you can see the eagle claw marks on the inside of the orbit.
Wow.
That's
And
awesome.
on the
Now,
top,
to me,
yeah.
it just looks like a skull. So
Yeah.
how do you know it's not a human?
Well, initially, it was greeted with a lot of skepticism, an enormous amount of skepticism. The British basically poo-pooed it and said that it was an ape, that it was too small, it was a juvenile. Raymond Dart found it, and he looked at the teeth and recognized that the teeth do not look like ape teeth, but look like human teeth. And he recognized that the skull appeared to have the foramen magnum underneath the skull, positioned underneath. But the foramen magnum actually isn't there, so it was guesswork on his part.
So what's the
And
difference between the teeth? I mean, between...
There's subtle differences.
It's subtle.
That's about the best I can
Okay.
say. It's the relative position of the cusps of the
I see.
teeth, to size, and the thickness of the enamel on the teeth. That
I read
that-
something about how they were lined up was different.
Yes, the tooth arch in a human tends to be parabolic, and in an ape it tends to be the arches are parallel, and so
Do
you
we
can
know,
show
is there any sense of why that is?
the face is shortening in a human.
Oh, right.
So you're
they've got
basically
the-
pulling it back in and tucking
I
it
see.
underneath the head.
Right.
So the head gets bigger in human evolution. I equate it to my students like a Jiffy Pop popcorn popper. Over time, you watch the head just swelling and swelling and swelling.
And that's, I remember from some of my
The
human
brain size
evolution
increase.
classes that there was some conjecture that the reason the head was able to grow so large is because we started walking upright first.
Possibly. That's an excellent question, and it's one that gets a lot of attention and research as to why exactly brain
I suppose
size
it's easier to
changes.
support a larger head if you're over your...
Not
Yeah.
really, because think of a buffalo. A buffalo is walking around with 35 pounds on a stick, and it's doing just fine.
Yeah.
The Tong child was originally thought to be an ape, but then Broom came along about 10 years later, and Broom came along a number of years later and found further material. And so even though the Tong child was poo-pooed as an ape by the British, subsequently Broom came along, and Robert Broom, and did more work at the area. And they found an abundance of specimens, and that demonstrated absolutely that this thing was a bipedal human relative. There was a tremendous amount of material available.
So we've got 5 minutes. I want to have you mention dental microwear analysis, because looking through the different species that we know about and the things that are claimed that we know about them, they usually say, well, it was a fruit eater or it ate nuts and tubers. And I find that interesting. How do we know that?
Well, if you look at the teeth, the food that you eat, if it's got brittle parts on it, it'll scratch and dent the teeth. If you eat food that has very small particles that are hard, and you grind the stuff in your teeth and chew that up, like grass is very famous for this, it'll leave scratches on the surface of the tooth, just like you would scratch a table. If you crunch up very hard objects and you crunch them up in your jaws, it will tend to pit the teeth. It'll just break off tiny little flakes of it that look, you can see them under an electron microscope. They're microscopic in size. And there's various kinds of polishing that different food consistencies leave on the teeth.
Right.
And,
So if it's a leaf eater, it'll have a bunch of scratches because
right.
it's grinding on
That's right.
But if it's eating nuts or something, it'll have a bunch of pits in it.
That's right. That's right. And so you can use the microwear analysis to tell what the animal was eating in the last days or weeks of its life. And so if you get enough specimens, you can start to put together a picture of the consistency of the food items that the animal was eating. And get a picture of this animal was probably eating fruit, or this animal was probably eating tough vegetation, this animal was eating leaves, this animal was eating very hard objects. What those hard objects were, it can be hard to say, but it gives you an idea of the animal's diet.
Is there anything else you guys wanted to cover since we've only got a few minutes?
It's a huge amount to
No.
cover.
I know it's way
It's
too much.
a tremendous
I
amount to
kind of
cover.
feel like we jumped around a lot, but there's so much to talk
There's
about.
lots
It's just
good
a
information
tremendous
there,
amount
though.
to talk about.
Yeah.
Well, there's one thing I'd like to say about this tract, and that is the biologist Frank Zindler, who one-time president of American Atheists, has written a rebuttal of this particular chick tract, although I think it's changed since he wrote his rebuttal. It's changed slightly. But one of the things he points out in his examination of this tract is that for millions of Americans, this is the only exposure they have to evolutionary theory.
Wow.
Because for many people, they don't get it in an exposure to it in public schools. And that's true here in Arkansas, in fact. In fact, I think the majority of students in public schools here do not get exposure to evolutionary theory.
I had some letters to the editor that I wanted to go over. Maybe we can go over those next time. But in one of the letters, an angry creationist from here locally was saying that he thought that evolution and science they need to start teaching it in the churches, so that when their kids start going into college, they'll have some sort of ammunition to defend them against all this atheistic, communistic science.
Well, to give you an
Which is
idea
crazy.
of what caliber of people typically represent those refuting evolution, that guy Kent Hovind, I think we mentioned earlier, was about to give a presentation in a debate about anti-evolution side, and some skeptics put together a little joke on him, and they sent him a slide showing a dinosaur jaws in the stone with a little man like running away from its jaws.
I remember seeing that.
And claiming that they had been fossilized just as the guy was getting away from the dinosaur.
It's
and
really
his jaws are like right next to the little skeleton, and he fell for it, and he put that in his presentation and showed it to everyone. And then later, of course, they revealed it was a big gag.
Oh, and then they denied that it was a fraud.
Oh, really? Okay.
Nice.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's all the time we have. I really appreciate you guys coming. I think your expertise has definitely made for a
Yes.
better show.
Definitely.
And hopefully we'll have you guys on next time.
And
Thanks.
to our viewers, email us if you got questions, or if you think we're wrong, or
Oh yeah, we definitely want to pimp the voicemail.
yes, if you want voicemail.
430-2112. Call us. All right, thanks a lot, guys.